The first sign something was wrong was my name card. It wasn't on the table. I was standing just inside the banquet hall of St. Eleanor's Church, clutching a wedding program with my brother's face embossed in gold, scanning round tables dressed in ivory linen. Names were printed in neat black script. Couples, families, even distant cousins I barely recognized, but not me. My name is Claire Donnelly. I was 34 years old that afternoon, single, financially stable, and apparently optional. It was my younger brother Ethan's wedding, Christmas weekend, December 27th. The kind of family event that gets talked about for years, measured in photos and seating charts and who sat where. I stood there long enough that a volunteer finally approached. "Are you with the Donnelly family?" she asked kindly. "Yes," I said. "I'm the sister." She frowned, checked her clipboard again, then smiled apologetically. "One moment." She walked away. I stayed where I was, feeling something tighten in my chest. Not surprise. Recognition. Because this wasn't the first time my place had been flexible. Growing up, Ethan was the one who needed things. Attention, support, grace. I was the one who managed. I adjusted. I didn't cause scenes. My parents called it being mature. At the time, I believed them. The volunteer returned with my mother. Mom looked beautiful. Navy dress, pearls, hair done exactly the way she liked when she wanted to look composed. "Oh, Claire," she said, touching my arm lightly. "You're here already." "It's the ceremony," I said. "Where am I sitting?" She hesitated. Just half a second. "Enough. We had to make some last-minute changes," she said. "Ethan's in-laws brought more people than expected." "And?" I asked. "And you're flexible," she said, the word landing like it always did. She gestured toward a small table near the back. A service table, half hidden behind a pillar. 2 empty chairs. No name cards. "You don't mind, right?" she added. "It's just the ceremony." I looked at the table, then at her. "No," I said quietly. "I don't mind." That was a lie. But I'd been telling it my whole life. I sat down alone as the music started. Watched my brother walk down the aisle beaming. My parents glowing in the front row. I clapped when everyone else clapped. I smiled when cameras turned. No one noticed where I was sitting. After the ceremony, things got worse. At the reception, seating charts were posted near the entrance. This time, my name was there. Table 12. I followed the numbers, weaving through laughter and champagne flutes until I reached it. Table 12 was next to the kitchen doors. The chairs were mismatched. Across from me sat 2 of Ethan's college friends, and a woman I'd never met who spent the entire dinner loudly complaining about the chicken. I ate quietly. Halfway through the meal, my aunt leaned over from another table. "Claire, honey," she said softly, "why aren't you up front with your parents?" I smiled. They needed space. She nodded, unconvinced. Then came the speeches. My father stood first, told a story about Ethan's determination, his heart, how he'd always known how to take charge. My mother followed, tears in her eyes. "And we're so proud," she said, "to support him as he builds his family." She didn't mention me, not once. Then Ethan stood. He thanked his wife, his in-laws, my parents, his friends. "And to everyone who helped us make this happen," he said, "we couldn't have done it without you." I clapped. Again. Later, during dessert, my mother found me near the bar. "Oh, I almost forgot," she said, handing me a slim envelope. "This is for you." Inside was a card. No check, no gift, just a handwritten note. "Thank you for understanding today. We knew you would." I folded it carefully and slid it back into the envelope. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about seating, or weddings, or oversight. This was about expectation. I was expected to bend, to absorb inconvenience, to make room. Because I always had. I left early. No one noticed. That night, alone in my apartment, I took off my dress and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at that envelope. Something small had happened. Small enough to dismiss. Small enough to forgive. But it cracked something open. Because once you realize your place is conditional, you start noticing all the ways you've been placed there without your consent. And I didn't know it yet, but that seating chart was the first piece of evidence. Everything after would be harder to ignore. 2 days after the wedding, my mother called. She didn't ask how I was. She never did after events like that. Asking would imply the possibility that something hadn't gone perfectly. "Claire," she said, brisk and familiar, "I need you to come by the house this afternoon." I was at work, staring at a spreadsheet that suddenly felt very far away. "For what?" "A few things," she replied. "Your father and I are meeting with someone tomorrow. There are documents we need organized." There it was again. Need. I glanced at the calendar on my screen. "I can stop by after 6. "That's fine," she said. "Ethan will be there too." I almost laughed. Of course he would. Their house looked the same as it always had. Immaculate. Carefully curated. Photos of Ethan's graduation, Ethan's promotions, Ethan and his new wife smiling from a dozen frames. There was one photo of me, tucked on a side shelf, from 10 years ago. My brother was already at the dining table when I arrived, sleeves rolled up, coffee in hand. He smiled like nothing had happened at the wedding, like we hadn't spent an entire day orbiting separate realities. "Hey sis," he said. "Mom said you'd help." I sat down and opened the folder my mother slid toward me. Inside were financial statements, property tax notices, loan documents. I scanned the pages slowly, a familiar unease settling in. "What is this?" I asked. My father leaned back in his chair. "We're restructuring a few things." "With who?" I asked. Ethan answered before they could. "A private lender. Short term." Smart move. I kept reading. The amounts were larger than I expected. The interest rates? Alarming. "And the collateral?" I asked. My mother folded her hands. "That's where you come in." I looked up. "We need someone neutral," she said. "Someone responsible. To hold a temporary power of attorney." The room went quiet. "For what purpose?" I asked. "So we can move quickly," my father said. "It's just paperwork." That phrase again. Just paperwork. I looked at Ethan. He avoided my eyes. "What exactly would I be authorizing?" I asked. My mother smiled tightly. "You're overthinking." "No," I said calmly. "I'm reading." I flipped to the back of the stack. And there it was. A clause referencing a family-held property I recognized immediately. My grandmother's house in Ashford Hills. The place she'd lived alone for 20 years. The place she swore she'd never sell. My stomach tightened. "You're using her house?" I asked. My father waved a hand. "Only as a guarantee. Nothing changes." I closed the folder. "Does she know?" I asked. Silence. Ethan cleared his throat. "She trusts us." That wasn't an answer. "I'm not signing this," I said. My mother's smile vanished. "Claire," she said carefully, "we're asking for help." "You're asking me to take responsibility," I replied. "Without consent." My father's voice hardened. "This family supported you when you needed it." I met his gaze. "When was that?" His mouth opened, closed. "That's not fair," my mother snapped. "You're making this difficult." I stood up. "No," I said. "You made this quiet. There's a difference." Ethan finally looked at me. "Why are you doing this?" I held his eyes. "Because I'm done being the safe option." I left without another word. That night, my phone filled with messages. From my mother. From my father. From Ethan. "You're overreacting. You're misunderstanding. We thought we could count on you." I didn't reply. Instead, I drove to Ashford Hills. My grandmother, Lillian Donnelly, answered the door in her cardigan, surprised but pleased. "Claire," she said. "What a treat." We sat at her kitchen table, the same one where she taught me to play cards as a child. I told her everything. Not emotionally, not accusingly, just facts. When I finished, she sat very still. "They never asked me," she said quietly. "No," I replied. She nodded once. "I wondered why your father kept asking about my will," she said. That sentence landed like a weight. I drove home in silence. For the first time, I wasn't questioning myself. I was questioning them. And that shift made everything else inevitable. Because once you stop doing favors that put you at risk, people show you exactly how they plan to use you. And I knew now. The wedding seat wasn't the insult. This was. The first thing my family did when I said no was pretend nothing had happened. That was always their strategy. Silence first, reassurance later, pressure last. For 3 days, my phone stayed quiet. No messages, no calls, no passive-aggressive check-ins disguised as concern. If I didn't know them, I might have thought they were respecting my boundary. They weren't. They were rearranging. I found out on the 4th day, when my Aunt Marjorie called. She never called unless something was wrong, or someone needed managing. "Claire," she said, lowering her voice immediately. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you upset with your parents?" I stood in my kitchen, coffee untouched. "Why do you ask?" "Well," she said carefully, "your mother mentioned you were feeling overwhelmed, that you'd asked for space." That was interesting. I hadn't asked for anything. "I declined to sign paperwork," I said. "That's all." Marjorie hesitated. "They're saying you've been under a lot of stress lately. Work, relationships, that maybe you're not in the best place to make decisions." I closed my eyes. There it was. Not confrontation, not accusation, reframing. "They said that?" I asked. "She didn't mean it badly," Marjorie rushed to add. "You know how your mother worries." I thanked her and hung up, my hand steady but my chest tight. By that afternoon, the narrative was in place. Claire is sensitive right now. Claire doesn't handle pressure well. Claire means well, but she complicates things. They weren't angry I'd refused. They were adjusting for next time. That evening, Ethan texted me. "Can we talk? Just us?" I waited an hour before responding. "About what?" There was a pause. Then, "You put us in a tough spot." I stared at the screen. No apology, no acknowledgement, just positioning. I agreed to meet him the next morning at a cafe near my office. Neutral ground. Public. He arrived early, already seated, coffee untouched. He looked tired, not guilty, just inconvenienced. "You blindsided us," he said after a brief hello. "I answered a question," I replied. "That's not a blindside." He sighed. "Mom's upset." "She usually is when she doesn't get what she wants," I said. That surprised him. I could tell. "You didn't used to talk like this," he said. "I didn't used to notice things," I replied. He leaned forward. "You're reading too much into this. It's just a short-term arrangement." "Using Grandma's house," I said. "She's fine with it," he said quickly. "She doesn't know," I replied. He hesitated. "Did you tell her?" he asked. "No," I said. "You didn't want me to." Silence settled between us. "Finally," he said. "We were counting on you." I met his eyes. "That's the problem." His jaw tightened. "You always do this. You wait until the worst possible moment." "I didn't choose the timing," I said. "You did." He shook his head. "You think this makes you principled. It just makes things harder." "For who?" I asked. He didn't answer. That afternoon, Laura Mitchell called me. I'd met her years earlier through work. A contracts attorney. Sharp, direct, not sentimental. "Your grandmother reached out," she said. Asked a few questions about her estate. I felt my pulse slow. "What kind of questions?" "The right ones," Laura replied. "Are you involved?" "Not officially," I said, "but I should be." "Then you need to move quickly," she said, "because someone else already has." That sentence landed with more force than anything Ethan had said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I can't share details without authorization," Laura said. "But I can tell you this. There's activity, and it's recent." That night, I drove back to Ashford Hills. My grandmother was waiting for me, tea already made. She looked smaller than usual, wrapped in a sweater despite the heat. "They've been asking questions," she said without prompting. "About my house, about papers I signed years ago." "What kind of papers?" I asked. She frowned. "I don't remember signing anything recently. But your father keeps mentioning things I don't recall." I took a breath. "Grandma, I need you to tell me everything, even if it seems small." She nodded. As she spoke, a pattern emerged. Casual visits, vague conversations, documents mentioned but never shown. "They never pressured me," she said. "They just assumed." That was worse, because assumption is what people use when they believe ownership is already decided. I stayed late that night, going through her files with her permission. Old deeds, insurance papers, a will drafted 8 years ago. Nothing alarming. Yet. But Laura's words echoed in my head. Someone else already has. Driving home, I realized something that made my stomach drop. They didn't need me to sign anything. They wanted me involved, so they could say I knew, so they could spread responsibility. So if something went wrong, it wouldn't land entirely on them. That's why I'd always been included, not because I mattered. Because I was useful. The next morning, Laura called again. "I need you and your grandmother in my office," she said. "Today." I didn't hesitate. Whatever they were rearranging, I was done being furniture they moved around without asking. This wasn't about family anymore. It was about control. And once I saw that clearly, There was no unseeing it. Laura's office was on the fourth floor of a brick building downtown, the kind with narrow hallways and frosted glass doors that made everything feel intentionally private. The waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Not comforting, reassuring. My grandmother sat beside me, her purse clutched in both hands. She looked calm, but I could feel the tension in the way her knee bounced slightly under the chair. Laura didn't waste time. She greeted us, closed the door, and sat across from us with a legal pad already filled with notes. "Lillian," she said gently, "I'm going to ask you some questions. If you don't understand something, say so. If you're unsure, say so. There are no wrong answers." My grandmother nodded. "I understand." Laura started with basics. Age, address, current health, medications. Then she shifted. "Has anyone discussed using your home as collateral for a loan?" My grandmother blinked. "Collateral?" "As a guarantee," Laura clarified. "For money." She shook her head slowly. "No, I wouldn't agree to that." Laura looked at me briefly, then back to her. "Has anyone asked you to sign documents recently?" My grandmother hesitated. "They brought papers once, said they were updates. I didn't sign anything that day. I told them I wanted time." "Who is they?" Laura asked. "My son," she said. "And Ethan." The room went very quiet. Laura nodded once, writing something down. "Lillian," she said, "do you currently have a power of attorney in place?" "I thought I did," my grandmother said. "Years ago, with my husband, before he passed." Laura looked up. "It was never updated?" "I didn't know it needed to be," she said simply. That was the moment everything shifted. Laura leaned back slightly. "Then we need to act. Today." She explained it calmly, clearly, without drama. Without a current power of attorney, decisions could be made in ways my grandmother didn't intend, especially if someone argued urgency or incapacity. Not easily, not without paperwork, but enough to cause damage before it could be undone. "I don't want trouble," my grandmother said quietly. "I know," Laura replied. "This prevents it." I watched my grandmother think. Really think. Not defer, not smile politely. "Claire," she said, turning to me, "I want you." I swallowed. "Are you sure?" She met my eyes. "You're the only one who asked." That sentence stayed with me. We signed the documents that afternoon. Medical power of attorney. Financial. Narrowly defined. Specific. Protective. Laura explained every clause before my grandmother initialed. Nothing rushed. Nothing assumed. When we were done, Laura gathered the papers into a folder and slid it toward me. "This doesn't mean you make decisions," she said. "It means you stop others from making them without consent." That distinction mattered. I didn't feel powerful. I felt responsible. As we were leaving, Laura stopped me. "Your family will notice this," she said quietly. "They may not know exactly what changed, but they'll feel the resistance." "I'm not looking for a fight," I said. "I know," she replied. "But they are." My phone started buzzing before we reached the car. 3 missed calls. All from my mother. I didn't answer. That evening, she showed up at my apartment. I hadn't invited her. She stood in the hallway, arms crossed, expression tight. "What did you do today?" she demanded. I didn't pretend ignorance. I protected Grandma. Her jaw clenched. "You went behind our backs." "I went in front of her," I said. "That's the difference." She stepped inside uninvited, looking around like she was reassessing something. "You don't understand how this looks," she said. "I understand exactly how it looks," I replied. "You're angry because you lost access." "That's not fair," she snapped. "It's accurate," I said. She stared at me, searching for something. Guilt? Doubt? The version of me that would fold. She didn't find it. "You're overstepping," she said finally. "No," I replied. "I'm stepping into what you avoided." Her voice dropped. "You're going to tear this family apart." I held her gaze. If honesty does that, it was already broken. She left without another word. Later that night, Ethan called. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. "You think you're doing the right thing," he said, "but you're not. You're just making enemies." I deleted it because something had become very clear. They weren't upset because I'd accused them. They were upset because I'd changed the structure. For the first time, decisions couldn't be made around me. They had to go through me. Not because I demanded it, because my grandmother chose it. That was the line I drew. Quiet, legal, irreversible. And I knew, as I sat alone that night, that they wouldn't stop. People who are used to control don't adjust. They escalate. And the next move wouldn't come with raised voices. It would come with paperwork. The papers were filed on a Tuesday. Laura warned me it would happen quickly, but I still felt it when the confirmation email came through. Time-stamped. Logged. Real. The power of attorney was now official. And just like Laura predicted, my family felt it immediately. They didn't call to ask what I'd done. They called to tell me I'd gone too far. My father left the first voicemail. "Claire," he said, voice low and controlled, the way he spoke when he wanted to sound reasonable. "Your mother is beside herself. You've embarrassed us. This wasn't your decision to make." I listened to the message once. I didn't respond. Ethan texted next. "We need to fix this. You created a problem that didn't exist." I stared at the words for a long moment. Then I typed back, "I stopped a problem you didn't want me to see." The reply came almost instantly. "You don't know everything." That was the first honest thing he'd said. 2 days later, Laura called again. "They've retained counsel," she said. "Not to challenge the power of attorney, yet, but they're positioning." "Positioning how?" I asked. "They've requested copies of historical documents," she replied. "Old deeds, prior wills, anything that establishes precedent." I felt my shoulders tense. "To do what?" "To argue intent," she said. "They want to show that your grandmother always trusted them with her affairs. She trusted them because she didn't think she needed protection," I said. "Yes," Laura replied. "And now they're trying to prove she still doesn't." That afternoon, my Aunt Marjorie called again. This time, she didn't soften her tone. "They're furious," she said. "Your mother is telling everyone you've turned against the family." I said nothing. "She said you've always resented Ethan," Marjorie continued. "That this is your way of punishing him." I exhaled slowly. "And what do you think?" There was a pause. "I think," Marjorie said carefully, "that you're the only one who asked your grandmother what she wanted." That was enough. The next escalation came quietly. A letter arrived at my grandmother's house. Certified. Official-looking. I read it twice before I handed it to her. It was a request, not a demand. Carefully worded. My parents were asking her to attend a family meeting with their attorney to clarify intentions and avoid misunderstandings. My grandmother looked at the page for a long time. "They still think this is about confusion," she said. "No," I replied. "They think it's about leverage." She nodded once. "I'm not going," she said. "I know," I replied. That night, Ethan showed up at my apartment, unannounced. Again, he looked different, less confident, his jaw tight. His movements sharp. "You blindsided us," he said, as soon as I opened the door. I didn't step aside this time. "You should leave. We need to talk," he insisted. "You don't get to make decisions like this alone." "I didn't," I said calmly. "Grandma did." He scoffed. "You coached her." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "That's what you need to believe," I said. "Because the alternative is admitting you assumed she'd comply." His voice rose. "You're always the victim." I met his eyes. "No, I'm the witness." He stared at me, breathing hard, then laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You think this makes you powerful," he said. "It doesn't. It just means we stopped trusting you." I nodded. "You never did." That landed. He left without another word. The following week, Laura uncovered what they'd really been trying to do. A draft document, never filed, but prepared. A petition for conservatorship. I felt my stomach drop when she said it. They were preparing to argue diminished capacity, Laura explained. Urgency, financial complexity, the usual angles. "When?" I asked. "Before the wedding," she replied. The timeline clicked into place. The seating, the paperwork, the rush. They hadn't excluded me because I was inconvenient. They'd excluded me because I would notice. I sat in my car after the call, hands resting on the steering wheel, heart steady but heavy. This wasn't about money. It was about control, dressed up as concern. And now that control was slipping, they were willing to escalate from assumption to accusation. That night, I sat with my grandmother and told her everything. She listened quietly, her face unreadable. When I finished, she reached for my hand. "They thought I was easy," she said. "No," I replied. "They thought you were alone." She squeezed my hand. "I'm not." Neither was I. But I understood now. They weren't going to stop because I asked them to. They were going to stop because they couldn't move without being seen. And the next step wouldn't be private. It would be public and irreversible. The hearing wasn't dramatic. That surprised me. No raised voices, no accusations hurled across the room. Just a long table, neutral walls, and a court reporter seated quietly in the corner, fingers hovering over a keyboard. But the presence of that court reporter changed everything. Because once words are recorded, people choose them more carefully. Or they reveal themselves. Laura had prepared us for this. The conservatorship petition hadn't been filed, but the preparation alone was enough to justify a formal capacity evaluation. Not to accuse, to document. That distinction mattered. My grandmother arrived wearing a soft gray coat, her hair neatly brushed, posture steady. She looked exactly like what she was, an elderly woman who knew her own mind and was tired of people pretending otherwise. My parents arrived together. Ethan came separately. They avoided my eyes. The evaluator, Dr. Helen Morris, was direct and unsentimental. She explained the process, the questions, the purpose. "This is not an interrogation," she said. "It's a record." That word again. Record. She started with orientation. Date, location, names. My grandmother answered without hesitation. Then memory, then judgment. "What would you do?" Dr. Morris asked. "If someone asked you to sign a document you didn't understand?" "I wouldn't sign it," my grandmother said. "And I'd ask why they didn't explain it." Dr. Morris nodded. "What if that person insisted it was urgent?" "I'd be suspicious," she replied. Ethan shifted in his seat. My father stared straight ahead. Dr. Morris asked about finances, about her home, about her wishes. "I intend to stay there," my grandmother said. "Until I can't." "And who do you trust to help you make decisions if that time comes?" Dr. Morris asked. She didn't hesitate. "Claire." I felt my throat tighten, but I kept my face still. Dr. Morris made a note. Then came the harder questions. "Have you felt pressured by family members regarding your property?" A pause. "Yes," my grandmother said. The room went very quiet. "In what way?" Dr. Morris asked. "They assumed," she replied. "They spoke as if decisions were already made." "Did you agree with those decisions?" "No." Dr. Morris nodded again. Calm, methodical. That was it. No confrontation. No defense. Just answers. When the evaluation ended, Dr. Morris thanked everyone and explained her report would be finalized within 48 hours. My parents stood immediately. My mother's voice was tight. "This was unnecessary." Laura responded before I could. "It was preventative." Ethan laughed softly. "You're enjoying this." I looked at him. "No, I'm documenting it." That afternoon, the report came through. Clear, unequivocal, full capacity, no cognitive impairment, no basis for conservatorship. Laura forwarded it to me with one line. "This closes that door." I exhaled slowly. But closing one door opened another. 2 days later, a notice arrived. Not from my family. From a bank. They were requesting clarification regarding an inquiry made about my grandmother's property 3 weeks earlier. An inquiry that had not resulted in a transaction, but had raised internal questions. Laura reviewed it carefully. "They jumped too early," she said, "before they had authority." "So?" I asked. "So there's a trail," she replied. "And banks don't like uncertainty." The next week, Ethan's business partner called me. I didn't answer. He left a message anyway. "Claire," he said, voice cautious, "I think there's been some confusion involving family assets. I'd appreciate a call." I forwarded the message to Laura. "Do not respond," she said. "Let them come to us." And they did. Not all at once. Quietly. One by one. Questions, requests, distance. The version of events Ethan had been telling didn't hold up against written reports, timestamps, and third-party records. That's the thing about paper. It doesn't bend to relationships. It doesn't care who's favored. It doesn't forget what people hoped no one would check. My parents tried one last approach. They sent a letter, handwritten, carefully worded. "We want to move forward as a family. Let's put this behind us." No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a request to reset without accountability. I didn't respond because I understood something now that I hadn't before. Every time I'd stayed quiet in the past, they'd called it maturity. What it really was permission. Permission to assume, to decide, to move me where they needed me. The hearing, the report, the paper trail had done something important. They'd removed interpretation. This wasn't my word against theirs. It was the record. And the record was not on their side. That night, my grandmother and I sat in her living room, the late afternoon light stretching across the floor. "They look smaller," she said suddenly. I smiled faintly. "They are." "No," she corrected gently. "They always were. You just couldn't see it before." I thought about the wedding, the seat they hadn't saved, the assumption that I would adjust. I thought about the documents they wanted me to sign. I thought about how close they'd come to turning concern into control. This wasn't revenge. It was exposure. And exposure changes the balance permanently. Because now, every move they made would be visible. And the next chapter wouldn't be about stopping them. It would be about what happens when people realize they can't go back to the way things were. Not with me watching. Not with the record open. The first article appeared online on a Thursday morning. It wasn't about my family. Not directly. It was a short local business piece buried on page 3 of the regional news site, the kind most people skim past. A bland headline about a delayed development project. No names in bold, no accusations. But I recognized the company immediately. It was Ethan's. I read the article twice, then a third time, more slowly. Funding delays. Regulatory review. An unnamed lender withdrawing pending clarification of asset backing. Carefully worded. Legally safe. Devastating. By noon, my phone started buzzing. Not from my parents, not from Ethan, from people who had never called me before. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. A former colleague of my father's. Someone who claimed to be a friend of the family, but couldn't quite explain how. The questions were cautious. "Is everything okay with your grandmother? I heard there was some confusion about property. Hope this isn't too personal, but are you involved?" I answered none of them, because for the first time, I didn't need to. The narrative had shifted. Before, it had been simple. Claire is emotional. Claire is difficult. Claire doesn't understand how things work. Now there were documents, reports, dates. Now there were journalists and lenders asking their own questions. That afternoon, Laura called. "They're trying to contain it," she said. "Your parents, I mean." "How?" I asked. "By offering explanations," she replied. "Different ones, to different people." That sounded familiar. "They're saying there was a misunderstanding," she continued. "That nothing improper occurred. That you overreacted and involved lawyers unnecessarily." I leaned back in my chair. And that explanation doesn't align with the record," she said, "which is becoming a problem." That evening, my mother called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Claire," she said, her voice brittle. "Why didn't you warn us?" "About what?" I asked. "This," she snapped. "The attention, the consequences." I closed my eyes. "You were warned," I said calmly. "You just didn't believe me." She lowered her voice. "People are asking questions." "Yes," I replied. "That's what happens when paperwork meets daylight." "This didn't have to be public," she insisted. "You tried to make it legal," I said. "Legal things leave trails." She was quiet for a moment, then softer. "You've hurt your brother." I let that sit. "Finally," I said. "He hurt himself. I just stopped cushioning the fall." She hung up. 2 days later, Ethan requested a meeting. Not through text, not through my parents, through his attorney. Laura forwarded the email to me with one line. "Your call." I read the message carefully. It was polite, controlled, framed as a desire to resolve misunderstandings before they escalated further. There it was again. Misunderstandings. "They want you to soften," Laura said when I called her. "They think you'll trade silence for peace." "I won't," I said. "I know," she replied, "but there's value in letting them speak." We agreed to a meeting. New to a location. Lawyers present. Ethan arrived late. He looked different than he had at the wedding. Thinner, sharper around the edges. Less certain. He didn't look at me when he sat down. His attorney spoke first. About stress, about timing, about unfortunate optics. Then, "You always had a problem with me," he said, not angrily, almost wearily. I met his eyes. "No. I had a problem with being used to make your plans easier." He shook his head. "You could have handled this privately." "You mean quietly," I said. He flinched. "I needed flexibility," he said. "And you made everything rigid." I nodded. "That's what boundaries do." He leaned forward. Do you know what this cost me? I held his gaze. Do you know what it would have cost Grandma? That was the moment he stopped talking. The room felt heavier after that. His attorney cleared his throat and shifted to logistics. Damage control. Future cooperation. Avoiding further exposure. Laura listened politely. Then she said one sentence. All future communication regarding Lillian Donnelly's assets will go through this office. Any attempt to circumvent that will be documented. Ethan stared at the table. The meeting ended without resolution. As we were leaving, he finally spoke to me directly. You didn't win, he said. I paused. I wasn't competing. He laughed once, bitter. You always think you're above this. I turned to face him fully. No, I just stopped standing underneath it. That night, my grandmother called me into her living room. She was holding an old photo album, one I'd never seen before. I want you to have this, she said. Inside were pictures from before my parents were married, from before the family hierarchy settled into place. Her handwriting was neat beneath each photo. Dates, names, context. People forget, she said. Paper doesn't. I understood why she'd kept it. It wasn't nostalgia. It was proof. As I drove home later, I thought about how close everything had come to slipping through the cracks. How easily assumptions could have hardened into irreversible decisions if I'd stayed quiet. The article was just the beginning. Lenders talk to each other. Lawyers share impressions. Trust erodes quietly. Then, all at once, the family had lost control of the story. And without that, they had nothing left to trade. I knew the next move wouldn't be financial. It would be emotional. Because when people can't control outcomes, they try to control perception. And I was done letting them do that. The hardest part was still coming. Not the legal fallout. The inheritance, not of money. Of blame. And I was about to see exactly who was willing to carry it, whether I liked it or not. The call came from my mother on a Sunday morning. That alone told me it wouldn't be good. She never called on Sundays unless there was a family emergency or a decision already made without me. I let it ring twice before answering, giving myself just enough time to steady my voice. Claire, she said. No greeting. We need to talk. All of us. I'm listening, I replied. No, she corrected. In person. Today. I looked out the window at the quiet street below my apartment. About what? There was a pause, then a familiar shift in tone. Calm. Careful. Performative. Your father and I are concerned about where this is going, she said. This situation has gotten out of hand. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. Where? I asked. Our house, she said. 2:00. I arrived exactly on time. Everyone was already there. My parents sat side by side on the couch, too close, like they were bracing for impact. Ethan stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, jaw tight. His wife Natalie sat in an armchair slightly apart, hands folded in her lap, eyes lowered. No one offered me a seat. I stayed standing. My father spoke first. This has gone far enough. I waited. You've created unnecessary damage, he continued. To Ethan's business, to this family's reputation. There it is, I said quietly. My mother flinched. We're trying to protect everyone. No, I replied. You're trying to contain consequences. Ethan stepped forward. You didn't have to make it legal. I didn't, I said. You did. I just refused to look away. Natalie looked up then, eyes flicking between us. Claire, she said softly, we're under a lot of pressure. I turned to her. So was Grandma. That silenced the room. My mother stood. We didn't raise you to be like this. I met her gaze. You raised me to keep things smooth. I chose something else. My father's voice hardened. You're forcing us to choose. I nodded. I know. That was the moment everything crystallized. My mother took a breath. Then we choose Ethan. The words were quiet, deliberate, final. No anger, no hesitation, just confirmation. I felt it land, heavy but clean. I assumed you would, I said. Natalie's face went pale. Mom. My mother held up a hand. This family stands together. I looked at Ethan. Congratulations, I said. You finally don't need me. He didn't respond. I picked up my bag. I'll tell Grandma. My father scoffed. You don't need to drag her into this. I won't, I replied. You already did. I left without another word. That afternoon, I drove to Ashford Hills. My grandmother was in the sunroom, knitting slowly, the light warm on her hands. She looked up as I entered. "You look tired," she said. "I am," I replied. I told her everything. Not dramatically, not bitterly, just the facts. When I finished, she nodded once. "They've always needed a center," she said, "and they were afraid it wouldn't be them." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a folded document. "I was going to wait," she said, "but I don't think I should." It was a copy of her updated will, dated the previous month, prepared quietly, independently. My name was there. Not first, not last, but clearly. And beside it, a clause that made my breath catch. "Any challenge to this will forfeit the challenger's share." She watched my face carefully. "I didn't do this to punish anyone," she said. "I did it to end the argument." I closed my eyes briefly. "They chose," I said. "Yes," she replied. "So did I." That night, the messages started. From cousins, from friends of friends. "Did you really cut off your parents? I heard you're tearing the family apart. Why would you do this to your own brother?" The blame had begun its migration. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I let silence do what it does best. Because the truth was already documented, and the people who mattered already knew it. What I didn't know yet was that my parents' choice wouldn't be the last one made that day. Ethan still had a move left, and he was about to play it. Not in court, but at the one place he still believed he had leverage, the will. Ethan moved fast. That was always his instinct. When pressure built, he didn't retreat. He looked for the nearest point of force and pushed hard, hoping something would give before anyone noticed the cracks. This time, the force was fear. I found out on Tuesday morning when Laura called me earlier than usual. "Your brother contacted my office," she said. "Not directly, through another firm." My hand tightened around my coffee mug. "About what?" "The will," she replied. "Specifically, its validity." I closed my eyes. "So he's doing it," I said. "Yes," Laura confirmed. "He's arguing undue influence." The phrase felt familiar now. Too familiar. "On what grounds?" I asked. "That your grandmother acted under pressure," Laura said. "That recent family conflict impaired her judgment." I let out a slow breath. "He's using me," I said. "Yes," Laura replied. "But not in the way he thinks." She explained it carefully. Ethan hadn't filed a formal challenge yet. He'd requested documents, medical records, draft histories. He was testing the ground, seeing whether intimidation alone might make us hesitate. "He's hoping you'll back down," Laura said, "because if he files and loses, that forfeiture clause activates." I thought about the meeting at my parents' house, my mother's calm decision. We choose Ethan. This was the price of that choice. "I won't back down," I said. "I know," Laura replied. "Then we prepare." That afternoon, I drove to Ashford Hills again. My grandmother was sitting at the dining table, a stack of papers already arranged neatly in front of her. She didn't look surprised to see me. "He called," she said. "When?" I asked. "Last night," she replied. "Very late. Very polite." I sat down slowly. "What did he say?" "He said he was worried," she said. "About me, about you, about how stressful this all must be." I felt a familiar chill. "And?" I asked. "He asked if I was sure," she said. "About the will." I waited. "I told him yes," she continued. "Then he asked if I'd had help deciding." I swallowed. "What did you tell him?" "The truth," she said. "That I thought for a long time, and that I was tired of people assuming my silence meant consent." She reached across the table and took my hand. "He sounded angry," she said, "but not at me, at losing time." That night, Ethan sent me a message. "This doesn't have to get ugly." I stared at the screen. Then another message followed. "We can still fix this as a family." There it was again. The offer. Silence in exchange for peace. I typed one sentence. "Any communication goes through counsel." I turned my phone face down. 2 days later, the formal notice arrived. Ethan was filing. Laura called it what it was. A bluff turned commitment. The challenge alleged that my grandmother's recent decisions were influenced by emotional manipulation, that I had isolated her, that I stood to benefit unfairly. Reading it felt surreal. I'd expected anger, accusation. What I hadn't expected was how hollow it felt, because none of it was new. This was the same story they'd been telling quietly for years. That I complicated things, that I made people uncomfortable, that I shouldn't be trusted with weight. Now it was just typed up and stamped. Laura was calm. "This is weak," she said. "But weak arguments can still do damage if people panic." "Will she have to testify?" I asked. "Possibly," she said. "But not yet." I went to see my grandmother that evening. She was calmer than I was. "I knew he might," she said. "That's why I added the clause." "I'm sorry," I said quietly. She smiled faintly. "Don't be. This is the last thing he can try." "What if it hurts you?" I asked. She squeezed my hand. "Claire, I'm 82. I've lived through worse than disappointment." The hearing was scheduled quickly, 2 weeks out. In the meantime, the family divided fully. Some relatives stopped speaking to me altogether. Others reached out, quietly, carefully, as if checking whether it was safe to be seen on my side. One cousin sent a message I didn't respond to. "I don't know who's right, but this is sad." It was sad. Just not in the way she meant. Ethan's wife, Natalie, surprised me by calling. I almost didn't answer. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "I didn't know it would go this far." "You married into it," I said gently. "You couldn't have known." She was quiet for a moment. "He's scared," she said. "Not about money, about losing control." I believed her. "He thinks if he lets go now, nothing will stop," she continued. "That's because it won't," I said. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. Not from fear. From clarity. I replayed everything from the beginning. The wedding, the paperwork, the assumption that I would absorb risk because I always had. This was the natural conclusion of that pattern. When you stop being useful, people accuse you of betrayal. In the morning, I put on a simple dress and drove to Laura's office. The hearing wouldn't decide everything, but it would decide one thing clearly: whether silence still had power, or whether the truth, once documented, could finally stand on its own. Ethan had made his last move, and he was about to learn something he'd never understood. Control only works when no one is willing to be seen. I was, and so was the record. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No dramatic ceilings, no echoing footsteps. Just a long bench, a seal on the wall, and a judge who looked like she'd seen every version of this story before. Which, I suspected, she had. My grandmother sat beside me, hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a light beige jacket and the same calm expression she'd carried into every difficult moment over the past few months. She looked like herself. That mattered. Ethan sat across the aisle with his attorney. My parents were behind him, stiff and silent. My mother wouldn't look at me. My father did, briefly, then looked away. When the judge entered, the room stood. We sat, and then something unexpected happened. Before Ethan's attorney could launch into his prepared argument, the judge leaned forward slightly and asked a single question. "Mrs. Donnelly," she said to my grandmother, "do you understand why we're here today?" "Yes," my grandmother replied without hesitation. "My grandson believes I don't understand my own decisions." The judge nodded. "And do you?" Yes, that was it. No speech, no emotion. Just clarity. The judge turned to Ethan's attorney. "Proceed." The argument was careful, polished, built on implication rather than fact. They spoke of family tension, of emotional strain, of the possibility that recent conflict had influenced my grandmother's judgment. They mentioned me without naming me directly, framing my involvement as excessive, isolating. I listened without reacting because I knew what was coming next. Laura stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She presented timelines, dates of consultations, independent legal meetings, medical evaluations, capacity assessments, witness statements. Each document was entered into the record methodically. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She asked my grandmother a question. "Lillian," she said gently, "why did you update your will?" My grandmother looked at the judge, then at Ethan, then back at Laura. "Because I realized people were making plans for me," she said, "without me." The courtroom was silent. "And how did that make you feel?" Laura asked. "Small," she replied. And I didn't like that. Laura nodded and sat down. Ethan's attorney objected to relevance. The judge overruled it. Then the judge asked me to stand. My heart beat faster, but my mind stayed clear. "Ms. Donnelly," she said, "what role do you play in your grandmother's affair?" "I hold power of attorney," I replied, as she requested. "And before that?" the judge asked. "I was her granddaughter," I said, "who visited, who listened. The judge studied me for a moment. "Did you advise her to change her will?" she asked. "No," I said truthfully. "I advised her to speak to an attorney on her own." "And did you benefit from the changes?" the judge asked. "Yes," I said, "but I didn't ask to." There was no reaction in the room. No gasp, no whisper, just the sound of the court reporter typing. The judge leaned back. She looked at Ethan. "Mr. Donnelly," she said, "stand." He did. "Do you have any evidence," she asked, "that your grandmother lacks capacity?" He hesitated. "No," he said. "Do you have any evidence," she continued, "that she was coerced?" Another pause. "No," he said again. "Then what you have," the judge concluded, "is disagreement, not grounds." She dismissed the challenge, just like that. No theatrics, no lecture, just a clear decision entered into the record. Ethan's shoulders sagged. My mother put a hand to her mouth. My father stared straight ahead. My grandmother exhaled slowly. Outside the courtroom, the hallway felt brighter. Laura shook my hand. "That's over," she said. "For good?" I asked. "For the will," she replied. "Yes." Ethan approached us before we could leave. His face was pale, taut. "This wasn't necessary," he said. I looked at him calmly. "You made it necessary." My mother stepped forward then, eyes shining with something that looked like desperation. "Claire," she said, "can we talk?" I shook my head. "Not today." She looked at my grandmother. "Mom, please." My grandmother met her gaze. "I spoke," she said. "You just didn't like what I said." We walked away. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment. The quiet heavy, but not uncomfortable. I thought about the judge's first question. "Do you understand why we're here?" Understanding had always been the problem. For years, I'd understood their expectations and adjusted myself accordingly. I'd understood when to stay quiet, when to be helpful, when to disappear. What I hadn't understood until now was that understanding doesn't obligate compliance. The hearing hadn't changed my family. It had clarified them. And it had clarified me. There was one chapter left, not about what they lost, but about what I refused to lose with them, myself. And that, finally, was non-negotiable. The day after the hearing, nothing happened. No calls, no messages, no sudden apologies wrapped in concern. That silence felt louder than any confrontation. I woke up early, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table watching the morning light move slowly across the floor. For months, my life had been structured around reaction, waiting for the next move, the next escalation, the next document, call, or accusation. Now there was nothing to respond to. That was unsettling in its own way. My mother broke the silence 3 days later. She didn't call. She sent a letter. Handwritten. 2 pages. Careful cursive. The same handwriting she'd used for birthday cards and school permission slips. I recognized the effort immediately. This wasn't spontaneous. This was drafted, revised, rewritten. I read it once, without reacting. Then again, more slowly. She wrote about stress, about how things had spiraled, about how no one had intended harm. She wrote that she felt caught between her children, that she hoped time would soften everything. She did not apologize. She did not acknowledge my grandmother's fear, or the attempt at conservatorship, or the months of quiet maneuvering that had forced all of this into the open. The letter ended with one line that explained everything. "I hope you can remember, we're still your parents." I folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer. Not thrown away, not answered, just filed. Because for the first time, I understood something clearly. Intent doesn't erase impact, and history doesn't excuse behavior. Ethan didn't reach out at all. Through Laura, I learned that his business was still struggling. Investors were cautious. Lenders were distant. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic. Just trust evaporating. That was the real consequence of the hearing. Not the loss of money. The loss of assumption. People stopped taking him at his word. My grandmother, meanwhile, seemed to grow lighter with each passing week. She started insisting on small outings again. Lunch at her favorite diner. Walks around the neighborhood. She corrected people more often, gently but firmly. "No," she would say, "that's not what I decided." It was subtle, but it was new. One afternoon, as we sat together sorting old photographs, she looked up at me and said something I didn't expect. "I used to think love meant making things easier for everyone else," she said. even when it cost me. I waited. Now I think love is letting people be uncomfortable with the truth, she continued, and trusting they'll survive it. I smiled. They will. Some won't, she corrected. But that's not the same thing. At work, things shifted too. Not because I changed jobs or demanded anything, because I stopped volunteering myself as the solution. I said no, without explanation. I let pauses hang in meetings instead of filling them. I stopped smoothing over other people's discomfort. No one pushed back. That surprised me. It turned out most of the pressure I'd felt for years had been internalized, learned at home, practiced everywhere else. When you grow up being the flexible one, you don't notice how often you bend until you stop. A month after the hearing, I ran into Natalie at the grocery store. She looked thinner, tired, but calmer. "Hi," she said, hesitantly. "Hi," I replied. We stood there between the produce bins, two people connected by history neither of us had chosen. "I didn't know how bad it was," she said finally. "I don't think Ethan did either, not really." I nodded. "Knowing and admitting aren't the same," she sighed. "I'm not sure what happens now." "That's not a bad place to be," I said. "It's honest." She gave a small, sad smile. "I hope one day you don't hate us." I considered that. "I don't hate anyone," I said. "I just don't protect people from the consequences of their choices anymore." She nodded, like she understood more than she wanted to. We parted without awkwardness. That felt like progress. The family gatherings stopped. No more group texts. No more forced holidays. At first, that absence felt sharp, like something had been cut away too quickly. Then, it felt peaceful. I spent Thanksgiving with my grandmother and a friend from work who didn't have family nearby. We ate too much, laughed at nothing, watched old movies. No seating charts, no expectations, just space. One evening, as I was leaving my grandmother's house, she stopped me at the door. "You know," she said, "people will tell this story differently when I'm gone." "I know," I said. "They'll say you were difficult," she continued, "that you overstepped, that you divided the family." I met her eyes. "I can live with that." She smiled softly. "Good, because the truth doesn't need unanimous approval." Driving home that night, I realized something had shifted again. Not just with them, with me. I no longer felt the need to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding me. That was freedom. There was only one chapter left now. Not about the court, not about the will, not about my family. About what comes after you stop shrinking, and what it costs, and what it gives back, in full. The year didn't end with reconciliation. There was no dramatic Christmas dinner, no tearful confession, no moment where everyone suddenly understood each other and said the right words. What it ended with was quieter and far more honest. My grandmother passed away the following spring. Not suddenly, not in crisis. Peacefully, in her own bed, in the house she had fought to keep as hers. I was there that morning, sitting beside her, holding her hand while the light came through the curtains the way she liked. She was calm. She had already said everything that mattered. The will was executed exactly as written. No one challenged it. Not because they'd changed their minds, but because they knew they couldn't win. The record was too clear. The paper trail too complete. The forfeiture clause too final. My parents attended the funeral. They sat in the back. They left early. We exchanged polite words. Nothing more. Ethan didn't come. I wasn't surprised. Grief doesn't soften people who are still attached to control. It just exposes where they were standing all along. In the months that followed, my life didn't transform in any cinematic way. I didn't move across the country. I didn't quit my job in a blaze of self-actualization. I didn't reinvent myself for social media. I simply stopped waiting. Stopped waiting for approval. Stopped waiting for understanding. Stopped waiting for permission to take up space. I kept my grandmother's house, but I didn't rush to change it. I left her chair by the window, her dishes in the cupboard, her handwriting in the margins of old books. Some things don't need updating. My parents and I speak occasionally now. Brief texts, holiday check-ins that feel more like weather reports than conversations. My mother has never apologized. My father signs his messages with love, like a habit he can't break. That's where it stays. Ethan and I don't speak at all. I don't know how his business is doing. I don't ask. Some chapters don't need epilogues. Natalie sent a card once. No return address. Just a few lines wishing me well. I appreciated the honesty of that. People sometimes ask me if it was worth it. The strain, the fallout, the permanent distance. They usually ask it gently, like they're worried the answer might be no. It was. Not because I won anything, but because I stopped losing myself in rooms where my silence was expected and my presence was optional. Here's the truth I learned too late, but in time. Families don't always hurt you because they hate you. Sometimes they hurt you because you're convenient, because you make things easier, because you absorb discomfort quietly. And the moment you stop doing that, they call it betrayal. It isn't. It's alignment. I didn't destroy my family. I refused to keep holding it together with my own disappearance. What I kept wasn't money, or property, or leverage. I kept my clarity, my boundaries, my right to decide who has access to my life. And if you're listening to this, if you've ever been made to feel selfish for protecting yourself, or dramatic for insisting on fairness, or cold for choosing distance over dysfunction, I want you to know something. You're not difficult. You're not disloyal. You're not wrong. You're just done shrinking. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories about quiet revenge, family drama, and what happens when the tables turn without shouting, like and subscribe. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't fighting back. It's standing still and refusing to move for anyone who only loved you when you bent.